really quite annoyingly this morning. It was the front page of today's Mail. Where is it? We got it right here. Holding it up to camera at the moment. Labour's £400 hit on your family holiday, the highest ever tax rates on flights, and analysis showing airfare levies for a family of four to somewhere like Disney World in Florida would go above £400 for the first time after this price hike. The finding comes ahead of Sunshine Saturday, which is next weekend. We've got Divorce Monday, Sunshine Saturday, when millions of you will buy your flights to your foreign holidays for next year. Critics are saying it makes a mockery of the government's claim that it has not raised taxes on working people. Let's bring in Andy Williams, the political commentator. Hi there, Andy.
Morning, Cristo. How are you?
Fine, thank you. So this is absolutely outrageous, isn't it? This is people who are hoping to go on maybe one holiday a year, working people who are already being hammered by tax thresholds not changing, by potentially the national insurance hike affecting their wages going up, all of these horrific times that we're in at the moment, inflation, creeping back up, high interest rates, and now they're being told that simply going on holiday is going to cost them more in tax than ever. It's wrong, surely.
Yeah, I think it is actually. And, I'm a Labour Party member. I voted for Labour. Like many Labour voters, I am disappointed with how things have started. I do think it's important to point out, and I know people are bored of hearing this, but it's important to point out that Labour was left with such a mess structurally and in every possible way of the economy. It was left with an economy in a complete state after 14 years of Conservative government.
The economy, Andy, was growing. Okay, not at an impressive rate, but the economy was growing. Inflation was practically back down at 2%. So in what way does the massive tax rises that Labour have imposed on people justify? How can that be justified when the economy was actually growing?
Well, hear me out, because actually the economy was barely growing. I mean, on a technicality, by about 0.2%. The reality is that the economy for the last decade and a half has been bumping along the bottom, barely growing, completely unproductive. It's been a disaster. In terms of inflation, we're only back exactly where we should be and where we normally are. So, but putting that to one side, my point is, in the short term, there was a need for tax rises to plug a massive gaping hole in our finances. My issue is I don't think Rachel Reeves has chosen the correct tax rises. I think employer national insurance and the increase in that is the biggest mistake Labour have made so far and will have the longest tail. And I don't agree with this tax rise either.
Where would you have raised taxes then if you... Well, I've got two questions for you. Where would you have raised taxes? But secondly, how can a plan for growth coincide with tax rises? Because you don't grow an economy and make people more prosperous by taking more of their own money.
Well, I agree. I broadly agree with you. You have to tax. If you're going to tax people, you have to do it in a smart way, in a way that doesn't stifle demand, doesn't stifle growth, and doesn't disincentivize people from doing all the things we need to make money, which is why I'm so against the employer national insurance rise. I think there could have been smarter tax rises on things like, and I know you are on Cristo, but people who own second homes and third homes and fourth homes, for example. I think there are all sorts of things you could have done there.
So let's drill that down then. So you would have increased the taxes that I, as a landlord, would have had to pay. So at the moment, as a landlord, I am subject to absolutely no mortgage relief whatsoever on the property that I own, meaning that I don't pay tax on the property, on the profit of that property. I pay tax on the entire rental amount that I receive, which is the only... I cannot think of another business that actually doesn't doesn't pay tax on entire entire income rather than profit, but I have to pay tax on the entire income, firstly. I have to pay for the property to be getting ready for its C rating when it comes to energy, which is on the horizon. I have to pay for all of the things along the lines of gas safety certificates, electrical safety certificates, all of those sorts of things as well. I have to pay for a landlord registration scheme, which is essentially just admin, which costs somewhere in the region of, for a one-bedroom property, about £1,000 over the course of the year. Where would you have expected more money that you would want me to pay to have come from?
Well, all of those things you've just described, Cristo, are costs of doing business. There are costs of doing business in any sector, in any industry. And I think, I'm not in favour of I'm not in favour of taxing people or businesses in a vindictive way or in a sort of envious way. But I think if you're looking at, where...
Yeah, so where else would you have taken tax from? How else would you have taken more tax from me as a landlord?
Well, if you weren't making any money on doing it, Cristo, then you wouldn't do it, would you?
I'm not making any money on doing it. I'm not making any money on doing it.
Why are you doing it then?
Because if I were to sell the property, I would be so hammered now on the increase in capital gains tax that there would be absolutely no point in selling it. And I'm going to hold on whilst breaking even, hoping for a situation where when we get a new government that some of this madness goes. But finally, I've just got new tenants and I am charging them the highest rent that I have ever charged for that property in order to try and break even on all of the nonsense that I have just outlined. And I'm telling you now, if you were to bring in more taxes on me, what am I going to do? I'm going to say to those tenants, sorry, you now are subject to another rent rise because I cannot afford to end up in a situation where I'm subsidising that property. And that is the lack of logic, I'm afraid, that an idea like you're having of imposing more taxes on someone like me has. It's not me that will end up suffering. I'm already not making a profit. It's the tenants, it's the people that you claim you want to help.
Well, let me turn it back on you then, Cristo, and ask, how do we plug the massive gap in the public finances without raising taxes somewhere? The alternative
so what would you have raised? What would you raise on landlords then? Where would you take the money? I've just explained what a landlord has to pay for. Where would you raise any more taxes from me?
As I say, if you're looking at a list of your priorities, politics is about priorities and about choices. And I'm afraid that I hear everything that you say, but landlords are not at the top of the priority list when it comes to helping
landlords
people.
Landlords are providing housing.
If you have a portfolio of property, you are not somebody who is struggling. Simple as that. Show me somebody who has a portfolio of several houses who is on the breadline. They're not.
All right, okay. When we return, we'll bring Peter Barnes in because he wants to come in and talk about this. Interesting text from Dean this morning as well, talking about this holiday tax rise. It's not just holiday tax rising. Look at how much car tax is going up in April. They're trying to stop us travelling, whether it's driving or flying, but of course the elite will be able to do both. Andy Williams still joins us, the political commentator who was, very, very graciously acknowledged actually as a Labour supporter that he doesn't agree with a lot of the tax rises that Rachel Reeves has chosen, however, believes that there do need to be tax rises. They've got to come from somewhere. Landlords was one of the places he suggested it, though he got some short shrift from me on that one, I'm afraid. Peter Barnes, political commentator, what do you think of either the landlord's plan or coming up with more tax plan?
Why do we have to come up with more tax? Why can't we just stop spending money? The fundamental problem is you asking the wrong question. It's not always how can we get more tax. It's are we spending the money that we already have correctly? You said earlier, there's no such thing as government money. It is public money and it should be sacrosanct. Unfortunately, the Labour Party don't see it that way. They see it as their money and they see your money as their money. They've got their hands in your wallet, whether you like it or not. Landlords, however, the big thing that many people on the left often get wrong is that the vast majority of landlords own one property or two. They aren't these massive property portfolio kind of organisations.
I think 80% of landlords only own one or two properties.
Yeah, and what's what is really concerning is the knock-on effect of this policy. Like you said, you're doing the right thing by tenants. Not everybody can afford to do that, and that means that you're going to see a lot of people migrate out of London, which will then have an impact on the economy. Policy doesn't happen in a vacuum. It was the first thing I was ever taught when I worked in Westminster. Everything has an effect on everything else, and the problem with the Labour Party right now is it's doing what I said earlier of siloisation. It's trying to fix this bit and doing that, and it's not doing joined-up government because it's not thinking further ahead. Keir Starmer said he wanted to stop sticking plaster politics. All he has done is sticking plaster politics.
Okay, let's let Andy respond to that. So why is the answer to this higher taxes? Why isn't it lower government spending?
Well, I think in the long term, that's a reasonable aspiration. You know, I'm sure that there are areas where we can look to get spending down, and actually the government is in the midst of conducting a comprehensive spending review, and it's what's called a zero-based spending review, where you look at every single aspect of government spending from the ground up. That's something that the Conservative government didn't do for years and years and years, wrongly. I think they lost control of government spending. And so there is an opportunity now in the next 6 months, I believe the spending review reports in April.
Yeah.
To look anew and completely in the round at all of the things we're spending money on, and hopefully, and I know for a fact, there will be areas in which government ministers are told they have to
do you see why that might stick in people's craw, though, when you have had a government saying terrible black hole, terrible situation, tax rises coming, air duty going up, car tax going up, landlords being hammered not only when it comes to tax but also by the renters reform bill, which is also another way where the risk of becoming a landlord is not rewarded any longer. However, public sector, here's £11 billion worth of pay rises with no preconditions on productivity. And by the way, if you want to get a train this weekend, the drivers aren't working that you've just given that massive pay rise to. Do you see why there is a disconnect between what you're saying about these terribly tough times and that money being handed over to the public sector?
So I'd look at it a slightly different way. The reality is that, and as I say it, I'm going to say it again because it's absolutely true, the economy was left in a complete mess.
Sorry, you say that, but it's not true. There
were certain things that were emergencies that had to be resolved straight away. Here's an example: the prison crisis. There was a point in the summer where there were fewer than 100 prison places left in Britain. That is insane. The NHS needed cash just to stay afloat in the short term. Now, we can talk about the need to reform the NHS, which I think we absolutely need to do. We need a mixture of public and private provision. But in the very short term, there were certain areas of the NHS where money had
Okay. What do you want to say to that, Peter?
The problem I have is this idea that the economy wasn't growing. The Office of National Statistics said it was going gangbusters. We were the fastest growing in the G7. I would say it was also a Labour manifesto. That was literally what the Office of National Statistics said. That is a quote from their press release. And you look at these pay increases, they have contributed, according to the Bank of England, to the rate of inflation. You say government is about choices. The choices this government has made has killed the economy stone dead. That is the reality. You know, you've got businesses closing, you've got joblessness on the increase. Let's look at this £400 increase. 237 billion.
The flights,
yes. The tourism is worth 237 billion. It's which is 4.6% lower than it was, and it's 1 in 10 jobs. Do you think that if you keep whacking up the taxes on that, it will start to affect that bit of the economy? This is the reality. It's really easy to go after the tax thing without thinking of the consequences in other areas.
What do you say, Andy?
Well, I've already said I don't agree with this.
But it's not just this one.
Okay, but what about the principle of? I think the point Peter is making is that it's easy. Again, there are so many areas where you think, okay. For instance, landlords, like I said, if you go for landlords, great. They must be wealthy. They must have, they've got this asset. They're not going to be poor. The people who actually end up ultimately suffering once you get down the food chain is tenants who either don't have somewhere to live because the number of properties go down, or they end up having to pay more rent because landlords are becoming more risk averse. The inheritance tax on farming, again, you look at it, a massive asset on paper. I understand why they would look at the high taxes on that. Who ends up suffering? Well, actually, people who need to buy food, because the number of farms that will end up being able to supply that food will go down because those farms will need to be sold, or big industries will come in who have less of a caring attitude towards the food that we'll buy from them, meaning the quality of food ends up going down. So it's sort of it's looking on paper that you think, great, I understand that we need tax rises, without actually following through of the knock-on effects of who ends up suffering as a result of those policies.
VAT on private schools is a prime example.
VAT on private schools, again, you end up with a situation where the poorest pupils in state schools will suffer. So what do you say to all of that, Andy?
Well, I mean, specifically on VAT on private schools, we'll see, because actually private schools have been putting up their fees way above inflation in massive ways for years and years and years. And I never heard this argument until VAT was introduced, which I think is just equalising a tax on a service that applies to almost every other area of the economy. So I think that's fine. I think in the medium term, Labour is going to have to look again at things like employer national insurance, because there is anecdotal and statistical evidence that that is hitting jobs and hitting businesses and hitting small businesses in particular. And I was at the CBI conference last month, which was a room full of CEOs, and they are really, really disappointed.
Disappointed? So they were apoplectic.
Okay, well, actually...
I was there as well. It was incredible. We'll
talk about what the CBI have had to say, and we'll talk about one of the effects of private school taxation as well, and the equalisation that you talk about when we return live here on Talk. Okay, still joined by Andy Williams, the political commentator, and, of course, Peter Barnes, political strategist in the studio here. And, Andy... you were talking about the VAT on private schools and sort of let's see what happens. It's equalising things. I don't know if you saw in the last 24 hours, it was reported that the surge that now they're having to draw up contingency plans in Whitehall because of the surge of demand of state school places, because of the number of private schools that are now predicted to close as a result of this VAT increase on private schools. So you have either the people who are sending their children to private schools that are remaining open, the middle classes, not the super rich, they don't care. The middle classes who won't be able to afford the VAT rise will send their children to private school, public schools, state schools. You've also got the private schools that will close, that will mean that there'll be a surge in state school places. Again, how does that help the poorest pupils? Because inevitably they will be the ones who suffer as a result of a surge of demand of state school places. And it's yet another example of where a tax that on paper you think, well, these people are wealthy, as to why it's brought in, but without it being thought through as to who actually suffers, and that's the poorest pupils.
So I don't think everybody who sends their kids to private school are wealthy necessarily. It is a choice, however. Of course, the Department for Education is drawing up contingency plans. You wouldn't expect it to do anything else. But I do not believe there is going to be a mass exodus from the private sector to the state sector. I just don't believe that's going to happen. I really don't.
The one issue...
There is no evidence yet that that's going to happen. Now, if it does, let's see. I'll be happy to be proved wrong. But I just don't believe that's going to happen.
So the issue with the VAT thing is actually to do with house prices and renters. Because what will happen is everybody will then have to move to the catchment area of a top state school. That will increase the cost of housing, which will also therefore increase the cost of renting. And yet again, the poorest people in society are hit by this policy. It's not just... the kind of direct impact. There is the secondary and the third kind of what we call the tertiary impact of that policy. And it's just the Labour Party is not thinking about that because it is ideologically driven. You may not believe that everybody who sends their kids to a private school is super wealthy, but that is the dominant trend within the thought of government. The thought of government is what can we tax, not how can we save money. We have to change the question, not keep answering the wrong question.
I mean, what do you think about that? And what do you think as well? I mean, I'm going to challenge you on your idea that there's not going to be an exodus. I mean, the government's own figures predict that 35,000 state school pupils will end up occurring. You'll end up having 35,000 pupils moving over to the state school system, and that will be the number of people that will end up in state schools, and that will be in the long term as a result of this policy. So those are the government's own figures. Now, those 35,000 are going to end up somewhere, and it's going to be the poorest pupils in those state schools that will end up suffering as a result of that influx of students.
If that happens, I don't think that's a good outcome, but I just don't believe that that's going to be the case. I accept they're the government's own figures. I just do not believe that's a theoretical way of modelling what might happen. I don't believe it will.
And responsible government is to answer responsible governing is having an answer to every single every single possible outcome. You can't just say, "Oh, it's not going to happen," so we don't need to worry about it. The problem is that whatever the government seems to keep thinking won't happen is happening. They're getting this wrong every single step on every single issue. Look at the winter fuel allowance one. That has been a catastrophe economically. And it's the national insurance one. We were both at the CBI conference. Every CEO I spoke to there said that budget killed them dead.
And in the last couple of days, the CBI have now said that they believe that there is a triple threat when it comes to us not having growth, going into a recession, and all of these other issues. We saw Boxing Day sales down by 10%. I guess the question out of this is everything that we've been debating with you today, Andy, and look, fair play to you for coming on and defending it, but none of it seems to point to this plan for growth. You don't grow an economy with all of these measures.
Well, you say I'm defending it. I'm defending aspects of it because I completely agree with you that not everything has been done correctly.
Do you regret now voting Labour?
No, not in the slightest. I'll tell you why. Firstly, that previous government deserved more than any in history to be out on its ear and down on 121 seats with the terrible leader they have, by the way. And let's not forget that Kemi Badenoch is a complete and utter...
Justifying Labour shouldn't be, but the Tories. That's what your argument is, but the Tories.
Well, frankly, it's Keir Starmer's biggest reason to be cheerful this Christmas is that Kemi Badenoch is a total travesty.
Well, she's only been in the job for 7 weeks.
Yeah.
She's been in the job for 7 weeks.
And you're also one of the type of people that are saying, the government's only been in power for 6 months. But so one person gets the freedom.
Labour being in government for 5 months, and I keep coming on to shows like this and being told that every single thing they've done is a disaster.
So what did you expect Kemi Badenoch to do in 7 weeks that Labour haven't done in 5 months?
Being leader of the opposition is a completely different job. It's about how you present yourself. It's about how you introduce yourself to the public. Mark my words, Kemi Badenoch has zero chance of ever becoming Prime Minister because she is
we heard nothing from Keir Starmer for about the first 3 years. I still have a problem knowing what Keir Starmer stands for and believes in, other than sort of, an honourable government and serving the people and all of these sound bites we got. But ideological reasoning and all of those sorts of things, I don't think we've ever heard from him. But certainly 7 weeks into Keir Starmer, we didn't have any policies.
Keir Starmer took over a Labour Party in the absolute doldrums and took it to an enormous, crushing general election.
And how long did that take him? Did he do that in 7 weeks? Did he do that in 7 weeks?
No, but my point about Kemi Badenoch is that some people, you can tell that they have the capability to turn the ship around.
Not Rachel
Kemi
Reeves.
Badenoch is not that person. She's a disaster.
All right. Listen, really good to talk to you. Thank you. Nice.